The other part that we've lost too is that the building surveyors have been smashed over the last dozen years to the point now where technically their insurance companies won't let them give advice.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Level Up. We are still in Tasmania, and I tell you what, the podcasts are just getting better and better down here. This community down in Tasmania is absolutely incredible, the way they work together, and they're definitely, I can feel it in the air down here. There's definitely this big improvement coming when it comes to the quality building, healthy homes, all those types of things. But our next guest, this is going to be a whole can of worms, and I've definitely been looking forward to this one since we spoke on the phone a couple of months ago. Our next guest has a business called 3-in-1 Building Assessment, which covers all your building inspections, your energy. He's known as the Energy Man. He looks after all your star ratings, does a lot of condensation and mold reports. Is widely recognised and respected as a absolute I'm not sure on the word, a bit of a gun when it comes to all this type of stuff. And he actually started the Australian Building Sustainability Association. So today we have with us Wayne Gorman. How are you, mate?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. I hear that you're a very hard man to get to do something like this. So I'm pretty proud to have you sitting here and be able to have this conversation.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's dive straight in, because this is a topic I'm very interested in. So you obviously do building inspections. I think you don't just do them in Tassie, you've done them all over the place, haven't you?
Yeah, pretty well in a lot of occasions, yeah, and also been overseas and looked at buildings overseas.
So you get to see all the stuff that builders do that they shouldn't be doing.
A fair bit of that, yep.
Yeah. So let's dive into this, because I believe there's a lot of clients out there that don't get the finished product that they should get. And a lot of the stuff that I'd imagine you see is stuff that gets hidden, covered by concrete, covered by wall linings, whatever the case may be. And the problem doesn't actually arise until possibly years down the track. And so with the inspections you do, are they like during the construction, or are they more once the problems come up?
Some of it's when the problems come up. Some of it, the client's got a bit of an inkling that things aren't going quite right. And then there's always the sort of wobble side of it, in that alterations and additions. There is this concept that if you're doing an alteration and addition to a house that was built in 1940, it doesn't have to be spot on because the house is 1940 and super right, mate. And I usually go in hard on those, because if you're building a brand new alt and addition to an older house, I don't care about the older house, but the alt and addition has to be perfect. And some of the stuff that goes through that's not quite there is quite substantial.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know where to bite my tongue in this one, because I'm going to stir things up a little bit. But like, the first one I'll bring up, like external window and door installation. Like, I remember they made some changes to the framing code up in Queensland. It's probably 5-6 years ago, and I went to they held a seminar, Timber Framing Australia, I think it was, put the seminar on, and I went along. And there was only, I don't know, there would have been over 100 people in that room, and there was only myself and 2 other builders. And everyone else in the room was engineers, certifiers, inspector type people. And I remember thinking to myself, holy shit, like, we're actually the ones that are on site doing this stuff. Why aren't we all? So my feedback on the feedback form was, every builder in Australia, it should be compulsory to do these seminars. And they, like I said, on their marketing now, that comments on the bottom of it. But I learnt things at that seminar, like, so like, for most of my career, there's like, we're always trying to improve things, do things better. But I was still doing things when it comes to tie down that I'd been taught by my builder or by my boss that were wrong. I didn't know any better. And I was shocked, because I thought I was doing a good job. And so, yeah, that really sparked an interest in when it comes to specifications, building codes and stuff for me. And it's really like, so my team and I talk a lot about this now. We improve our systems and processes. I regularly go to these types of seminars to improve my knowledge. But we basically have an industry that's full of people that aren't taught, like, you don't know what you don't know. And so clients are all getting these houses and paying all this money for things that isn't right.
But part of it too, I noticed in Tassie that illiteracy is a big part. And I remember going to a master builders meeting and there was some person from the government department saying, oh, we're going to teach you how to do this, and there'll be a pamphlet on that and an app for this. And some old builder at the back piped up and said, mate, these blokes can't read and write. They're not going to be able to do your stuff. And he goes, yeah, and we'll have an app for this and an app for that. And it just went straight over his head. So yes, you're right. We should be lifting the bar continuously, but if someone is illiterate and doesn't want anyone else to know, they're going to hide, and they're not going to go to these seminars and be a part of it, which is unfortunate for them because they're missing out.
It is a shame, and I do know that there's a lot of that in the industry, and I personally use that for an excuse for a very long time. Like, look at my writing on this notepad here, mate. Like, I'm probably every second word spelt wrong, but it makes sense to me. But that's our industry. Like, a lot of people in our industry, we see it with young apprentices coming through. Like, they're not good at writing or reading or spelling and all those types of things. But at the end of the day, that's no excuse. Like, if you want to be in this industry and you want to be a tradie or a builder, you have to learn this stuff. And so I'm a very visual person because of that. So I go to these seminars. I can't always keep up with the wording on the screen and stuff, but I can definitely visualize the pictures they show and hear what they're saying, and I can pick up enough from that, and then I can go away and do a bit more in my own time. But like, what's some of the main things you see on sites, like main issues?
It's a lot of it's the trade stuff, and over probably a decade, I've seen the builders are still trying to keep their level of performance, but the trades have been slowly degrading to the point where some of the stuff I look at and I go, why'd you even bother getting out of bed
Oh, that bad.
to come and do this? You know,
Yeah. Like what?
I did an inspection on a brand new townhouse that was supposedly the B&E Gold Star, blah blah blah, and I come away with a list of about 20 items that were, some of them were fairly critical in that there was no subfloor ventilation at all for this building, and it had prefab pine trusses holding up a lot of it, which would disappear in about 5 years. Yeah. Gaps in flashings that were big enough for a possum to get through. Iron not turned down. Gaps in construction changeovers from renders to some other cladding. Balconies that were just not right. And
like waterproofing, falls.
Oh, the setup for the spigots for the glass balustrades, waterproofing, especially if they're over the top of another room underneath, the waterproofing wasn't right, and yeah, the list just goes on and on and on.
But they all seem like very common issues or problems to me.
Yeah, probably a lot of it. And I've been in a fair few houses where I get in the roof, because I'm probably one of the few that get in the roof. Most building surveyors don't even carry a ladder. They just come in. They're looking for high risk stuff.
Yeah.
Is my glass right? Is the smoke detectors in the right spot? Tick, 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 let's get out of here. I've been in roofs where 1/3 of the house wasn't even insulated, and the rest of it just had bats thrown around to sort of make it look good, especially around the manhole.
Yeah. Put them where they can reach.
Yes. Yeah, if someone did that. Yeah, it's just sloppy, bad.
Yeah.
But the builder takes the risk and goes, is anyone going to have a look in here in the next 7 years? Probably not. I'll get away with that. And then the other one is you get trades like people that install air conditioner ducting, and they'll just, I've been in one place where they threw all the bats in a pile in the middle of the roof because they were in the way.
Mm.
So there was probably 3 square metres of bats piled a metre high, and the rest of the ceiling had nothing.
Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it? And like the average homeowner wouldn't like that. The trade
They
would
don't
just
know.
leave the site, put the manhole cover back down, and leave, and the homeowner probably never sticks their head up there and checks what's going on.
Never. Even underneath, if it's got a subfloor, I turn up for inspections and go, oh, I've got to get into the subfloor. And they go, oh, have you got bolt cutters? The lock's rusty and we've never been in there since we've been here
Yeah,
or built it. And I go in there and the waste pipe off the shower is disconnected 10 years ago and it's a swamp under there. And people go, oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, far out.
Yeah.
That subsoil ventilation one's a huge one, isn't it? And like
Yep.
I must admit, like that got brought to my attention a long, long time ago because again, through my apprenticeship, I didn't do any of that construction.
Yep.
Everything was slab on ground or very high off the ground. And it wasn't until well into my building career that we had some houses come up that were on brick bases and had enclosed subfloors.
Yep.
And I remember receiving one of the first ones we did, receiving a set of stamp approved drawings, and the certifier actually had a note on it to make sure all the subfloor ventilation was correct, and that made me look at the building code and see what was required. But until
Yep.
then, I'd never been shown or told what the requirements were. Um, and then yeah, obviously from then on, you just know it's something that. But what I started to do, or I still do it now, is when I learn things like that, I push the architects, designers. Like I think it should be there. Like it's definitely my job to know and install it and build it, but it should be their job to show vents or mechanical whatever the case may be on the drawings.
Yep.
And I think a lot of builders make those assumptions that, well, I just do what's on the drawings, but it's our responsibility as builders to make sure the building's built to code, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's also the mindset of, because the NCC says these are the minimum standards. So when you look at subfloor ventilation, it says the minimum will be X amount of millimeters for the perimeter, blah, 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 blah. But there's a little clause under there, I don't know whether it's subclause B or C or something, and it says if there is likely to be moisture under the dwelling in the subfloor, double the subfloor insulation. So it's not increase it by 10% or 20, it's double the
Yeah.
subfloor ventilation. And that's not minimum, that's just to handle a bit of moisture under there. And I look at that and go, I wonder how many people have actually read that and know that that exists, especially in Tassie, where you build on a bit of sloping ground and as moisture comes down the hill.
Well, I've just learnt something. I've never read that clause that you meant to
Yep.
double it.
Yep. Double it, yeah.
Yeah.
And Dewsbury, Mark Dewsbury from the building department in UTAS, he just puts it all, he does architectural work as well. It's just standard for him.
Yeah.
Work out the minimum and then double it.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, the way I look at things now is just because our building code, like it's actually quite pathetic that we have to work to a minimum standard.
Oh no,
Yeah.
it's the bar. This is, I mean, some people say, oh, if this is the worst house you can build, if you want to build the worst house you can possibly build, there you go. There's the bar for it. But you've got to have a line in the sand somewhere. So that's the line in the sand. It's got
Yeah.
to be like this so that it protects the occupants.
So our rule in our business is that we always go above and beyond. Like if
Mm.
there's a waterproofing detail, flashing detail, whatever it is, like put extra fall on balconies, all those types of things. But I like the other one you mentioned there about expansion joints or where different surfaces meet each other. Because I know on our jobs, even sometimes now, it's up to myself, my supervisor, or some of my lead carpenters to point out to the likes of brickies and stuff that, hang on a minute, like there needs to be a flashing behind that, or there needs to be an expansion joint there, like, um, and I really do feel that's where so many homes fall over is their lack of supervision.
Mm. Yes. Yeah, that's a big part of it. The other part that we've lost too is that the building surveyors have been smashed over the last dozen years to the point now where they're technically their insurance companies won't let them give advice.
Yeah,
Once upon a time, the old building surveyor would come on site and he goes, "You've done a shit job there. Need to tidy that up. And if I come back and it's like that again, I'm going to kick you in the ass." And they'd critique their work all the way through. Whereas a building surveyor comes on site now and might issue a notice on them or whatever, but he doesn't tell them well, he might tell them what's wrong, but he doesn't tell them the rectification for it or best practice, or you could do it this way, or anything else. It's sort of like a silence now that I think builders are missing out on, that expertise and knowledge that a building surveyor has, because they've got a lot of knowledge and they look at buildings all day, every day. So they see what goes on.
So, like, what happens when you find things that are wrong? Like, if it, like when there is a registered trade or builder there, like what's the process? How does it work?
It just becomes a negotiation. If they're not accredited or registered, they usually head for the hills, duck under the radar, don't answer their phone, do whatever. My advice to the clients is usually try and get some document off them, especially in a wet area. Get a waterproofing statement, even if it's a stat deck. Just get something with a name on it, on a date, so that you've got a starting point, a reference if something goes pear-shaped later on.
Yeah.
Any piece of paper is going to help if you can get hold of it.
Yeah. So, like, I would love to hope that most builders and trades out there are doing the right thing, but I know they're not. Like I said earlier, the installation of external doors and windows is a shocking one. Like, you see windows, I'm sure you see it there. You have a 2400 high, 2100 wide sliding door that's nailed in with 8 finishing nails. Like, waterproofing is obviously, like, that isn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's one of Australia's biggest cause of issues, isn't it?
80% of all dwelling failures are wet areas, and the NCC and government have known about it since the 80s. And now we've just had a change to the waterproofing standard.
Yeah.
But there still is no mandatory inspection.
Which is, it seems crazy to me, like an issue that that is costing our industry a lot of money, because whether it's costing the homeowner or through insurance, like someone's paying for that rectification work, which would be playing a part in pushing the cost of building up. We're all paying more insurances for it. It just seems crazy that isn't, like, obviously you have to do structural inspections, foundations, slabs, and like some jobs driveways. Like, why would you not add one more inspection to do waterproofing?
There is a trend. It's sort of starting to pick up here. I went to a conference in America a couple of years ago, ASHRAE conference, and I was chatting to a bloke there who acts as a sort of like a mediator between the builder and the client, and he's on site every day to check what's going on, and he's the gatekeeper. And if something's not according to the plans, or there's a variation, or something needs checking on, he's there to do that on behalf of the client. And I'm thinking, well, that's interesting. That's sort of got a bit of a niche opening here in Australia, because
it seems crazy that a client's got to pay extra to manage someone that should be doing the right thing on site to begin with.
Correct, but I can see the logic in it. If you've got a several $1 million project underway, and it's got different things, techniques, or different buildings type construction or whatever, that it would be good to have someone there to have a look at it and go, yeah, I don't think that's right. I mean, tradies make things up as they go on. I've supervised some stuff, and you can tell when they get in a little huddle down the corner, and you go, okay, what's going on here? They go down and have a talk, and you go, what's happening, boys? And they go, oh, this isn't going to work here, so we thought we'd do blah, blah, blah. And I go, nah, I don't think so. I think we're going to do this. Oh, that's going to take ages to do that, and there's all this. And I go, that's the way we do it. No, we'll do it our way. It's quicker and better. And I go, well, we'll do it my way, or I'll ring your boss and he can come down and tell you how you're going to do it. And you go, oh, right, we'll do it your way then. But if I had left him alone, it's like quick and easy, cover it up, we're out.
But again, it comes back to the dollars, doesn't it? Like, so many trades and contractors aren't pricing work correctly.
Yes.
They're always trying to shortcut things.
Yep.
Is it compulsory to water test showers and wet areas?
Now there has to be a membrane, an actual measurement of the membrane. So that's supposed to be the sort of the new check. Make sure.
So what do you mean by that? Like the thickness?
Yes.
See, to me that seems crazy. Like, how do you check that?
You do it. You do as you're doing your waterproofing. You do a like a test sample so that it matches what's going on, so that you can actually cut that, peel it, and do a visual on it to make sure that it's got a sort.
Yeah. All right. I'll have to look into that more. But yeah, for years now, we water test all of our waterproofing. Like once it's dried and cured, blow a balloon up, stick it in the floor waste and flood the room and put a felt pen mark on the water and leave it sit for 48 hours. And I just think it's something that's so simple and I told the same story the other day on another podcast. We've had multiple leak. It's nothing against the contractor's work. One waterproof we had thought we were having to dig at him, but he thought I was crazy. It was the first job he'd done for me, and he thought I was crazy for water testing it. Told me he's done hundreds of bathrooms, never had a leak. Very first one he did for us. We come back the next day, and all the water was it was a renovation. All the water was gone through the ceiling. It was on the floor downstairs. Like something just so simple. Yes, it adds a couple of days to your program, but just something so simple gives me confidence that it shouldn't have an issue. Like the only room for error with that is the tiler coming in or another trade and scratching it. But we've got a process now where our tiler is very passionate about it. So he's now the waterproof. He's done all his licensing. He's very, very good at it. So he's in control of the entire process. Does all the waterproofing, lets us do the water tests, and then his team do the bedding, do the tiling. So they're all aware of the possibilities and the results and obviously what can happen if things go wrong. And that's been working really, really well. But like I do a lot of videos on our socials and our job walkthroughs, and so many builders message and say, what are you doing that for? Like, what's the point of it? Like, to make sure it doesn't leak.
It's the acid test. It leaks or it doesn't leak. It's like doing a blower door test on a building. Is it airtight or not?
Yeah.
Blower door test will tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. We were just talking about this with the last podcast guest, with the blower door test and certified passive house. Like it seems like it's really ramping up now. Like everybody's talking about passive house in Australia, and there's a passive house conference and all this stuff. But I'm going to find out the numbers, but like, there's actually not a huge amount of certified passive houses in Australia, is there?
No, there's a fair few people building to a passive house principle. There's a gentleman in South Australia, Jim Woolcock. He did a project where they designed a house, built it, and followed it all the way through, tested it, and his conclusion in the end that the sweet spot for an efficient house was between 8 and 8.5 stars. He said after that, the incremental improvements are so small, and the dollars you got to throw at it to try and get there is just not worth money. All you get is the badge at the end to say, oh yeah, it's a passive house.
Yeah.
And if you want that, fine. But yeah, the sweet spot's between 8, 8.5.
Yeah. And so that's part of, like, you do the star rating stuff, you get involved with that. So is there more testing in the jobs that are trying to achieve that? Like, do you do more inspections on them? Or?
No, it's unfortunately it's turned into a bit of a political football. Going from 6 to 7 stars it was just shoved through quick because someone needed to satisfy something somewhere. It had not much industry discussions. The RISs weren't real crash hot, and it's more politics than anything else.
Yeah.
And in Tassie,
Well, that's the way with most of the rules we have to follow.
Yeah, but it's sort of very blatant with energy efficiency. In Tassie, the government here said, no, we're not going to 7 stars. We've got a condensation problem. We need to handle that first. Otherwise, we're just going to make the problem times 10. And hope they're going to review it again next year, and hopefully they sort of put the pause button on it again so that we're not creating more problems. And our style of construction is adding to it because there's this trend for flat roofs.
Yeah.
In the Northern Hemisphere, you don't build anything under 15 degrees. If you do, it has to have massive, massive tests and engineering and woofy tests and all sorts of things to make sure it's going to perform. Here, we just chuck them up a dime a dozen and go, yeah, sure, all right.
I think I'm not a fan of it. And again, that's only been through me doing more education and personal development that I'll put my opinions forward now to designers and architects, and I'll walk away from a job if I know the design's going to give me grief. Um,
Well, it can be
it,
high risk, very high risk to
yeah.
take on some jobs.
Oh, it definitely is. Like another conversation we were having the other day um, with Frank from Prime Design, like box gutters.
Mm.
Like everyone wants these flat roofs and parapets and things, and then they put these minimum standard size box gutters in. Like,
Yep.
where's the water going to go when it can't go anywhere? Straight into the ceiling. Like, just there's got to be more thought put into this. Like, I really push back. Like, we won't do a house now if it um, doesn't have some sort of eave on it.
Yep.
Like the same thing. I think the eave's a little bit of a safety device.
It is.
Not only does it shade the house and all those types of things, but obviously if you have an eave and the gutters back up and or the client doesn't clean their gutters and then the gutters flood, nine times out of ten the water can never get to a height that's going to enter back into the house.
Mm.
But so what's other things you see, Matt? Because I think if we can talk about things that you physically see people doing wrong, it'll help people understand what they should be doing better. Because I think one thing I know, one of my pet hates that I see on social media all the time is concreters pouring concrete and they're walking on the mesh and the mesh is touching the ground. Like it doesn't come back up, does it? Once the concrete goes on it.
No, well, none of them have hooks anymore to
Yeah,
pull it up as you go. And
yeah.
yeah.
Although my worst one is you see the concreters laying the mesh for a driveway and then they back the truck on it and they think that the hook, like pulling it back up a little bit here and there as they go along, is going to make all the difference. But
Mm.
like I love it. We do renovations and you pull driveways up and all the mesh is laying in the dirt underneath.
Mm. Yeah, one of the ones that's cropping up recently is because we've got new livability rules for some builds, and you're not supposed to have steps above this and blah blah blah. There is now, and I don't think the concrete is aware, but they're concreting up over all the weep holes or sub-ventilation to meet whatever's required, and that's a bit of a trap. It'll come back later on and probably be a problem. Um, the other one's probably main one for me is insulation. It's the critical part of making a building perform. It's given to the people that have the least amount of knowledge to put it in and have the least sort of attitude as to doing it. It's the the plasterer's apprentice that gets to shove it up there somewhere. And I've got photos. I've got a Facebook page and I've got photos. I've probably put up a couple of months of bags of insulation still in the roof.
Jeez, that's lazy.
And insulation has a use date on it that a lot of people don't know, because
I didn't know that.
if it's not installed within a certain date, it doesn't fluff up to its full depth, which means it's not
Ah,
performing as it's meant to be. And when the insulation program was on years ago, people were importing it by the container load in from China
mm.
because it was just selling like hotcakes. And then when the government crunched it and virtually shut it down overnight, I had phone call after phone call from people saying, "Oh, I've got container loads of insulation. I've got to move it before the use by date." And it's like, "Oh, sorry, can't help you out."
Well, we learn something new every day, don't you? So that's something I've never considered. But as soon as you said that, it makes sense
Mm,
because yeah, obviously the performance of insulation is it can't be too compact and it
mm,
can't be pulled apart.
yep.
So yeah, obviously if it's in an airtight like vacuum sealed in a bag and compressed, yeah, that makes complete sense.
Mm. And the old rule of thumb with the installation of it is that if you've got 10% gaps, you've got 50% loss.
Shivers.
So,
So 10% gaps. So if you're installing it between your studs and your rafters,
yep.
and you've got 10% gaps, you're losing 50% of the performance.
So you picture in your head how many roof spaces you've seen where there is half a metre around air conditioning ducts, a metre around downlights, bit missing here, gap there. Doesn't take long to get to 10%.
No, I'm writing that down, mate, because what the hand does, the mind remembers. Um, so 10% gaps is a 50% loss equals loss in performance. I'll be using that one with my team on site.
So it's critical to get it right. And the other thing that we can do that we don't do, because um, the value, the R value in the roof space is now increasing all the time. But what we can do, if it's feasible, is to actually buy your roof insulation in half values. So if you, I've had houses where they've got R7 in the roof, simply because that's what's been specified. So if you bought 2 lots of R3.5 bats, you can run one with the trusses or the joists, silver joists, and then you run the other one in the opposing direction, so you get full coverage and really good efficiencies. But it comes back to numbers. Is that feasible to do that from a dollar and a labour content? And you won't get your plasterer doing it.
Yeah. The second layer's got to go on from above. So, but it's like insulation. I think I believe is another one that should have an inspection.
Should, yes.
Like you like at a point where a house is all roughed in, it's lined on the outside, and it's ready for internal wall linings. I believe that should be another inspection, because at that point you can inspect the insulation. You can also inspect the fixings in all the external windows and doors visually, but you can also check like your electrical wiring requirements is lighting fixtures certain distances from taps and all that type of stuff. Like so like I think our industry would improve dramatically if those like waterproofing and a pre-internal lining inspection was added to the requirements. Like it's going, well, for a start, it's going to hold builders more and trades more accountable, because they know someone's going to be checking things. Number two, clients are going to get what they should be getting. And number three, it's just helping our industry. Like, people are actually taking pride in what they do. Because if we don't have inspections, there's always going to be trades and builders that are trying to cut corners. Well, that's just reality.
But there's also the people that don't know as well. So it sort of fills that void. Yeah.
I look at the insulation one. I'll put my hand up. Like again, that was something that towards the end of my actually no, I think it was when I started subbing and I was working for other builders. That became one of our tasks. Like, we had to start putting that in, and I could name you hundreds of jobs where we put the insulation up to the soffit height. So you had this whole, generally it was a 300 mm gap around the building that wasn't insulated.
And that's the most critical point, because hot air rises and it's going to push out wherever there's a weak spot.
Yeah, and I still see it now. Like, you drive around especially like a project home, volume home housing estate, like, you look around and you see the building part be up to soffit height, and the insulation's only up to that, and there's a clear hole straight through the top. But yeah, it was only from me, I guess, having interest and starting to get more educated. And well, the number one drive was my whole thing is about, I take my job seriously. I want to make sure I'm always delivering my client the best I can. And now it just comes back to something as simple, like my whole building business now is built around every single thing that we do has to be done as per a manufacturer specification. Like, everything we do, everything our trades do, like that's our bare minimum. Because I know something like that most homeowners would think is a standard isn't happening.
And you mentioned, sorry to cut you off, you mentioned volume builders there, and they're probably one that's driving down rather than lifting the bar. And I always remember going to an AWA glass conference one time, and I think she was the CEO at the time. Anyway, they had complaints about window installations in this big subdivision out the west of Melbourne somewhere, where they're building acres and acres of houses. And they pulled up outside this house that the person was installing windows. So there was 3 of them. They just sat in the car and they watched the bloke. Anyway, He'd pick the window up, he'd rip the rubber seal off the bottom of it and pick it up and shove it in the hole and bang, 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 and pack off the bricks and head off to business. Anyway, so they all got out and went over and said, "Oh, excuse me, we wanted to ask you a couple of questions." And you go, "Yeah, what?" Anyway, they said, "Oh, we noticed you ripped the rubber seal off the bottom of the window frame." He said, "Lady, you're costing me time. I only get paid $30 a window. Get out of my way." And that was his response.
Yeah.
So that was quite a good example of how volume homes are done.
Mate, when I started building myself, definitely not the current brickie we use, but we used a brickie that's what he did. Like, I turned up the site and all the rubber seals were on the ground. I was like, "What are you doing, mate?" He's like, "Oh, that's what we do." I said, "Why?" Because it doesn't allow, like, we get our bricks up tight, it seals it off better. And I said, "The whole reason it's there is to seal it up." Like, what are you talking about? Like, so it all, a lot of, like, everything we're talking about comes back to education. And again, it's dollars. Like, one is rushing to try and make money out of their job instead of putting more time into educating clients on how long it's going to take to do something correctly. I'd imagine the cladding installation, like, that'd be another big problem you see.
Yeah. Probably when EPS was expanded polystyrene was in its heyday. Lots of sills that were either level or actually negative, rolling back towards the window frame. And just bad installations or left out in the weather. Or most of the brickwork isn't too bad. Probably for some reason everyone seems to leave the expansion joints open. It's like you're supposed to weather seal it.
Yeah.
And I go to houses now.
What do you mean, when they're finished or during construction?
No, when they're finished.
Mm.
Yeah. I go to houses now where they're 15, 20 years old and still got open expansion joints, never been sealed.
You're
since
kidding?
day one. Yeah.
Geez, that's an easy one.
Yeah, it is an easy one, but it just gets left. And if you're on a weather side, like you get a predominant weather side of the building and it's got a couple of expansion joints, well, weather's going to drive the moisture in there.
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer.
And so they're just relying on some
Cobwebs.
crappy full-backed sarking that probably hasn't been installed correctly behind the joint to catch the water and run it down to the weep holes that are probably full of mud as the brickie hasn't cleaned them out.
Now you're talking.
But these conversations need to be had, because you see brickies throwing bricks up, and just, you can hear the mud falling down the back onto the damp course, and you're just like, guys, like, that water's got to be able to flow out of that. Oh no, it's fine. We'll go back through a lot at the end of the day. And so I have a lot of pet hates, actually. You're bringing them all out. Then you see them at the end of the day. This was way back. So my last year of my apprenticeship, my boss got quiet on work, so we went from doing custom homes to smashing out frames for volume builders. And so we'd go to a street, and I actually did a bit more of it when I became a contractor. I built up a large team. We would go into whole streets and just, like, smash up 20 frames for a volume builder. And so you're always working closely with the next trades that were coming through. And yeah, so the brickie would be laying the bricks, and I didn't know at the time. I knew it wasn't right, because I've always been big on putting in that extra 1% and doing my job correctly. Like, we'd go through and do all the sarking and the window installation, and then they'd come through, pull the rubber seals off. If the window was close to the corner and they couldn't get bricks in, they'd be tearing the damp course off the window. But you would see them at the end of the job going around putting their bar in and cleaning the weep holes in, and they were just jamming it in, and, like, you could hear it pushing through the damp course. So they thought they were doing the right thing by cleaning the weep holes out, but they were pushing everything through so hard that they were going right through the damp course and creating a hole where any water that comes down the inside cavity is just going to go straight through and soak into I guess it's going to seep into the footing and the slab edge. So there's a lot of room for education, isn't there? Like in that example, educating the bricklayer about why it is so important for him to minimize the mud that falls down the back, and why it's important for him to clean the weep holes out carefully.
I think that's the key is explaining the why. If they've got an understanding of the why, it makes sense. But if someone comes along and go, "Oh, don't do that," it's like, well, I've always done that, or I'm not going to keep on doing that. But the why, if you go, this is going to cause a big problem, blah 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 blah, show them an example, and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. We can change. Most people are quite open to change, but the why is the important part of it. Otherwise, it just becomes a mystery, and no one's going to act on a mystery. It's going to keep on doing what they do.
So, like another one of my pet hates is cladding getting smashed on with nail guns. Even if you can, I just think well, for me, from my point of view, it's a really bad finish. You generally end up with the scratches from the prongs on the nail gun. It penetrates the cladding too much. You would see it from bracing. Like, do you do frame inspections?
A bit, not a lot, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the same thing. Like with frame inspections, like the nails penetrating the ply, like the bracing sheet becomes useless.
Or worse, they're near a sea environment and they're all using bright nails or something that's not good for a salt environment. That's probably the other big one.
Oh, that's huge, and it's something that we do quite a lot of coastal work, and I point out to my clients, like, I will not be the cheapest builder, but I will do the best job I can. And one example I give them is fixings, because we know from our data now, like if you do a 300 square meter home on the ocean, lightweight cladding with all lightweight construction with all lightweight cladding, your tight end and fixing allowance can go from, say, $3,500–4,000 for a build that's not near the ocean to over 10 grand. By the time you buy all stainless fixings, stainless or galvanized fixings, and it's again, it's another pet hate of mine. You drive past a house that's been built in a salty environment, and it might only be 2 or 3 months old, and you can start to see the rust marks running down the wall where the nail heads are rusting. Like for a homeowner, they would just expect that the correct fixings are getting used. Like, how do we resolve just something as simple as that?
Yeah, well, as you said, back to education. And then I think the examples or stories and examples are really good for trades. And if the education was pictorial, mostly pictorial, it'd be really good. You know, you show a picture of rust stains down the side of a building, it's like, okay, I get that. It's pretty easy to look at. I've been to places on our coastal areas and they've used the wrong bugle screws for decking and everything, and all of a sudden, you know, there's one tread on a step that's a bit loose, and I lift it up and there's nothing there. There's just a little rubble of rust. It's actually gone, and I look at the rest of the deck and I go, that's not going to hold up for another 6 months. And then all of a sudden you've got to can it and start putting in proper fixings. And the other thing is that with imports, you know, if you start using Chinese stainless steel, it's not going to last any longer than anything else.
Well, we're definitely starting to notice that across the board, like the quality of materials, even when you're paying for some of the better ones, just the actual quality of, like you said, stainless steel, or even some epoxy coatings and sealants and things, they're just not what they used to be. Like, it just feels like everything in our industry is just being cut back further and further and further, to increase profits, I guess. Like,
yeah, and sometimes we don't know. It's like going to the supermarket and buying a box of something that used to be 300 grams and now it's 250 grams. And it looks like the same box as before, but you're paying a little bit more for a lot less. There was a infamous case in Victoria where some rich person built a big mansion down on the coast, right on the edge of the coast, and had rendered exterior, and after 9 months the render was going all dark brown. So they called the builder back and said, you know, you got a problem. Anyway, they tracked it back, and it was the windows were bought from China, the UPVC windows, but all the mechanisms and hinges and everything were just raw steel. And it was actually rust that was running down the side of the building. So they had to pull out, it was like $80,000 worth of windows.
wow.
Chuck them away and put new ones in. So.
they've paid for a good quality window, like, because a UPVC window is not cheap. But yeah, they like that's well, again, like just through this conversation, like you've got to ask those questions, don't you? Because something as simple as the fixings within a product have now cost that builder a lot of money. Um, I just want to touch on like responsibility for a bit. I'm not sure if you'll know more about it. We talked about it before, but I feel like I'm not sure what it's like down here. Like up in Brisbane, definitely not the ones we use, but there's a lot of trades that you hear a lot of stories that trades cut corners because they just know at the end of the day, like try and come back at me, they'll just give you the finger and walk away because they know that the responsibility lies with the builder. Is that the same down here?
Yes, unfortunately, yeah.
So, but with builders, one point I really try and get across is builders are responsible. Well, I personally believe that builders are responsible for the life of the home. And because there's been plenty of stories and cases around where this has become the truth, because if something goes wrong with the home that's serious enough, and I hear it now that when insurance companies come in to assess things, if the assessor believes that the problem has come up because the house wasn't, or the product, or the house, or the material, whatever the case, wasn't built or installed to the building requirement at the time the house was built, the insurance company won't pay it. They'll just go after the builder. And there's definitely stories around where even builders have been retired years, 10, 15, 20 years. The house might be 30 years old, and they've come in, they've done a scientific investigation, and they've chased the builder and they send the builder broke in his retirement. So we've got to take this stuff more seriously, don't we?
Well, I've heard of a builder up the coast that had problems. The house was going to be for himself, and he ended up selling it to someone else. And there was problems, and new owners wanted it fixed, and it just kept on going and going. It was a condensation problem, and it was built to code at the time. And in the end, the builder bought the house back at an exorbitant rate after paying $300,000 in legal fees as well. But yeah, to just negate the whole thing, he bought the building.
Yeah. Well, condensation, correct me if I'm wrong, but like basically with the new rule changes last year, it is the builder's responsibility, isn't it? So
and it's a trap.
Yeah,
it's a real trap.
I know when we do renovations and stuff, I always tell to my team, especially younger guys, like when you're pulling things apart, look around you and look for signs of moisture damage or water ingress, and let's have a chat about like how's it got there, what could they have done better, like, and that will help educate us on what we need to do better when we're building new buildings. But I'd imagine like the mold and the condensation is a lot worse down here. And
yeah, well, it is a big problem here in Tassie, but it's also a problem in the far north as well. It's just the opposite type of trying to get in, whereas ours trying to get out, or vice versa. It's such a variable because there is also the occupants of the building that can be adding to the problem or creating the problem and doing all sorts of things as well. So I probably get called out half a dozen times during the winter from real estate agents' management department saying, "Oh, we've got a complaint from this rental property and they've got black mold and they're all going to die and they're going to sue us," and blah blah. I go, yeah. So I'll go to a property and open up the door and go, poof, 30 degrees and 98% humidity comes roaring out when it's the middle of winter. And I go in and there's the tumble dryer going flat out in the laundry with no exhaust or window open, and the door's open and it's into the rest of the house, and they've got a split system running at 28 degrees. And I politely ask them questions. I go, "Oh, when's the last time you opened a window?" And they go, "Oh, we don't open windows." They got 3 dogs and 2 cats and 6 kids running around. It's like, whoa. And it's just, you can feel the moisture hanging in the air. And I go, "I know why you got a mold problem."
Yeah.
Nothing to do with the construction. It was all about the occupants.
Yeah, and I think that's something that builders probably need to be more aware of, because if they do get called back for these types of problems, it's not always the way the house was built.
No.
Like I've heard stories of people having large fish tanks
Mm.
in houses, and those rooms the walls are just saturated. There's mold in the ceiling, simply from the moisture that's getting sucked out of the fish tank.
And it's a very, very hard conversation as have, because if there's a problem and a builder goes back and goes, oh, it's the way you're living, that just raises the heckles on the people straight away. It's like, don't you tell me that I'm, living badly or whatever.
Yeah,
So it has to virtually come from a third party, and it's a very delicate, polite conversation that you've got to have to say,
yeah,
the way you're living isn't quite contributing to a good environment in the house.
yeah.
And education again.
What's the number? Like, it's I'm trying to think. Like, is it something like the average 4-person family can is it 200 liters of moisture a day or something?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So even just general living in a home, when you take into account your cooking and the washer and dryer and just the moisture that we give off as humans,
Mm.
that's also a contributor. So that, like, a lot of the new rule changes designed to deal with that, aren't they? Like, that's having correct ventilation and all those types of things.
Yeah, but it's interesting because the ensuite that I went to for this ventilation problem, the exhaust fans that were put in were rated fans as per the NCC, 25 litres or whatever, 25 or I think it was 25 litres per minute or whatever it was. But they weren't working. I got a tissue and held it up against the exhaust fan, and the tissue just fell down. There was nothing going anywhere.
Mm.
And when I got in the roof, the ducting had been shoved up into an old cowling system that went through the roof, and it was just blocking it off. So
Yeah.
you can install the correct things, but if they're not working the way they're supposed to, and then I've had a conversation with one of the condensation gurus, Clarence McAllister, and we both agree that the other big problem is that whoever's installing the exhaust fans, if they buy a roll of 6 metres of ducting, they never trim it off. They just get the whole lot and they just throw it out into the roof. So if the roof cools down of a cold night and there's warm, moist air going through the ducting, it's going to condensate in the first 2 metres and sit there. It's not going to go anywhere. So then the next time you use it, there's another lot of warm, moist air going into the ducting. And guess what? You're going to start growing things in that first 2 metres because it's being fed every day by nice warm air, moist air. And I've had a few where one day she said, oh, we've got a problem with the ensuite exhaust fan because after we finish having our showers and everything, about 15 to 20 minutes later, it starts dripping back through the exhaust fan onto the floor and leaves a big puddle on the floor. I go, yeah, I know what's happening. And that's what it was, like 6 metres of ducting just sort of tossed around the roof. There was the actual physical line between the exhaust fan and the eave where it was going out was probably 1.5 metres.
Yeah.
But it had to try and push through 6 metres of ducting to get there, and it wasn't doing it. So you could have, you'd probably have to up it to a 85 litre fan to try and push through that resistance. So,
Yeah, well, that all makes sense. I'm adding that to my list. I'll be talking to the team about that when we get back, because I definitely know the scenarios where the electricians just throwing a huge amount. We luckily in my building business, generally my own team that does the final fit off, so we'll cut the hole on the outside, pull it out, trim it off, and put the vent on there. But it's like you just educating me on that. It's actually something that they should be doing with AFIN, like installing the correct length of ducting.
But it's an education thing, because it is assumed that a fan that has a litre rating is going to push that air. No one educated on the fact that you get resistance. The longer the tube, the greater the resistance.
Yeah.
To the point where it's not pushing it.
Yeah. So, mate, before we wrap it up, like, I guess some advice you give to people in the industry, like
keep learning. Go to conferences. take the time out and go to conferences. What I do is pre-COVID, what I was doing is a couple of websites that you can Google for conferences around the world, anything.
Yeah.
And you look up building and construction, and usually I hone in on energy efficiency. How about we go to Singapore this year? There's a conference on in Singapore, and
Yeah.
we tack a couple of days on at the beginning
Tax
or the end.
deduction, work trip.
It is. It's a business trip, and just going to expos all the time. Even for builders, if they went to a building surveyors conference, there's one in every state every year. I'm going to Brisbane in May for Brisbane one.
Oh, so Surveyors and Certifiers Conference?
Yep.
I'm going to look into that. Surveyors and Certifiers
you
in May.
get like eight CPD points or something, 8 or 9 CPD points. But just the conversation, the topics that are discussed, even stuff that you wouldn't even think of, like the big conversations in the building surveyors at the moment are about electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And what do you do in that situation where you've got a fire in a garage that cuts off your exit from upstairs or something else?
Mate, if you ask me, they should be banned. It's the worst, biggest con in a long time.
I think they'll phase it. There was an interesting comment by the head of the Honda Motor Company, and he said, we're not even interested in going down this path. He said, we'll simply buy the credits to get through this phase, and they're looking at all sorts of other...
Most manufacturers around the world are slowing production and getting out of it. Like it was never ever going to be, like for me, I was my thing is I don't like just be told something and then jump on a bandwagon. So I like to do my own homework and look into things. And it amazes me that more people don't. But like with lithium, like you investigate the damage that that's doing to the planet by the way that's mined. Like the villages that have been hunted out, that have been there for centuries, the destruction it's doing to deserts and rainforests. One of my mates is quite high up in mining, and I actually didn't realise, like, he's been doing some consulting work for a lithium mine over in Western Australia, and the lithium. So it's underground, but they break it down and screen it and do as much as they can with it here, but there's no processing plant for lithium in Australia. So it then has to be trained and trucked from the mine to a cargo ship, shipped to China and refined. Out of all that material they ship over there, only 3% of it ends up being usable. Like that just doesn't make sense. Like all that time, money, energy, just wasted resources. Yeah, I could go on all day about that, but I find that very interesting that that's a topic that's getting discussed at a surveying and certifying level. Because you see all the horror stories now of, I know one of my mates is in the fireys. Like fireys now, when they go to a house fire, have to be accompanied by an electrician. Because if there's a EV set up there, so the reason that started to happen, I don't know if that's the same everywhere, but up in Brisbane, is because the lithium, like they'd put a house fire out during the night, and the next morning the house would be back on fire because the lithium would be so hot it'd catch fire again. So during, like if there's a house fire, electrician or Energex, someone has to attend the house and actually cut the main power off to the house because lithium, is so dangerous. But
the other surprising thing is that the NCC jumped on it very quickly, and there's now provisions where car parks have to have a certain amount of infrastructure in place for charging and solar on the roof and everything else. And then it's a strange push, but it'll the populace will determine how it works as to whether they sell or not. So
it cannot last. I saw the figures there the other week actually. Like the sales of electric vehicles around the world has declined. Like it had this huge spike. It was just growing and growing and growing, and then like in the last 6 or 8 months, it's declined like 28% or something. So, but that's a conversation for another day. But mate, really appreciate your time. And yeah, I think these conversations need to be had because builders might think they're doing the right thing. And if we're not having these conversations about waterproofing and testing your showers and installation of insulation following manufacturer specifications, our industry won't last. So it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So really appreciate your time. Thanks very much for coming on. Is there anything you want to say before we get out?
Thank you for the invitation. Very kind of you.
No worries. Well, look, guys, if you like the conversations we have and the value that we give you during these podcasts, please like, subscribe, share, comment, all those things so that we can continue to deliver you Australia's best construction podcast. Cheers, everyone. See you on the next one.
Are you ready to build smarter, live better, and enjoy life? Then head over to livelikebuild.com/elevate to get started.
Everything discussed during the Level Up podcast with me, Duayne Pearce, is based solely on my own personal experiences and those experiences of my guests. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. We recommend that you obtain your own professional advice in respect to the topics discussed during this podcast.